Good day. I'm Ambassador Catherine Ebert-Gray. As you know, U.S. voters are going to the polls to elect the 45th President of the United States. We will soon witness the conclusion of a long campaign season, and we are all proud to celebrate the results along with our friends here in Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands. Elections are important. They give citizens a voice in the most fundamental way by deciding who will govern their nation. As we sit back and watch the results of these elections, I would like you to hear the voices of some of these citizens. I've asked members of the U.S. Embassy team to share with you what these elections mean to them. I hope you will enjoy hearing their perspectives and witnessing the results of these historic U.S. elections. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Joel Mabry. I'm the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Port Moresby. Presidential elections. I get excited when I hear those words. They conjure up a time when I was a newspaper reporter covering elections. This was back in the 80s and 90s. Journalists have a front row seat when it comes to elections. A lot of people don't realize that. You get to interview the candidates, ask them all sorts of questions, including some that might lift their image, and others that might tarnish the candidate's image. Elections are a four-season affair. Journalists, they cover the primaries in the late winter and spring, when the field of candidates is still broad. And at that time, of course, there's lots of intrigue and speculation about who among the maybe dozen or more candidates might be the eventual winner. Later, in the middle of summer, you're there as a journalist at the national conventions, the Republican and the Democratic National Convention. I still recall when I was a journalist the euphoria surrounding the Democratic National Convention held in San Francisco in 1984. All the major Democratic Party poobahs, the major personalities of the party were there. Reverend Jesse Jackson delivered one of the most stirring speeches ever made at a convention. Then in the middle of autumn, there was election night. I loved the suspense as the night wore on and waited for the election officers to release the early results, which often, but not always, gave a pretty accurate idea of who was going to win. While some of us were glued to the computer screen watching election results, other journalists were making the rounds of the party's campaign offices. The best place to be was at the headquarters of the winning candidate, of course. Everyone was in a good mood, the quotes were easy to obtain, and the champagne was flowing. Worst place to be was at the losing candidate's headquarters. There, the mood was glum. Quotes were short and sour, and the champagne, well, stayed in the bottle. Finally, in the dead of winter, journalists get to cover the presidential inauguration and the transition of administration. Through it all, journalists are serving the community by giving citizens the information they need to participate in civic affairs. Political journalists serve as watchdogs to assure honest governance and campaigns and seek to focus their coverage on issues of importance and not just daily spin. My hope is that the journalists in Papua New Guinea will carry out their responsibilities as well in 2017. And I hope the good citizens of Papua New Guinea will respect the unique role that journalists play in our societies, and when needed, demand that the press do its job.
My name is DAmato, and I am from the great state of New Jersey, which is between New York City and Philadelphia. For 15 years, I was a corporate attorney, and one of my areas of expertise was helping corporations comply with the U.S. campaign finance laws. It's expected that the 2016 presidential election will cost $5 billion US, or about 15 billion PINA. The US is the largest democracy in the world, and it costs a lot of money to run for president. Candidates need to buy commercial time, hire staff to knock on doors, and travel around the country to meet voters and kiss babies. Another factor is the length of our presidential election. Candidates battle for about a year in the primary election phase to win the Democratic or Republican Party's nomination. Then they spend another 6 months running head-to-head in the general election. To pay for this, a lot of money needs to be raised. There is technically a public financing program for presidential candidates, raised by taxes. However, if candidates accept the public money, they're subject to spending caps. Those spending caps haven't increased with modern costs. So for about the past 10 to 15 years, most presidential candidates refuse the public money, which frees them up to spend as much as they can raise. Similar to PNG and every other democracy, there is always a concern that those who contribute to a candidate will expect political favors or have unfair access or influence if the candidate is elected to office. In order to address this concern, the US campaign laws use 3 main strategies: separation, limits, and disclosure. First, if a sitting politician decides to run for office, he or she must hire a separate staff charged with raising political funds and running the campaign. Government employees doing the work of the people cannot be involved with the campaign. That way, official duties are separated from the campaigning. Second, there are limits to who can give to political campaigns and how much they can give. For example, corporations and trade unions are banned from giving money to political campaigns. Companies can set up what are called political action committees, or PACs, and raise money from them. But in no way can companies use operating funds to donate to candidates or political parties. Also, foreign nationals are not allowed to donate to candidates or PACs. There are also limits on the amounts any one individual or PAC can give to a specific candidate or political party. For example, no individual can donate more than $2,700 US for each candidate for each of the primary and general elections. Third, disclosure requirements help to ensure transparency. Every candidate and PAC must report to the Federal Election Commission the name, occupation, employer, and address of all individuals who give them more than $200 an election cycle. Also, campaigns must disclose how they spend every cent. This information is publicly available on the Commission's website for all to view. The Commission strongly enforces these regulations. The media and good governance organizations also use the website to monitor the election cycle. If there is a breach in the laws, candidates, PACs, and corporations usually are subject to fines from the Commission and intense negative media and public relations scrutiny. There have been candidates who have lost elections for running afoul of these laws. We in the United States, like in every democracy, struggle with the balance between meeting the expense of running fair elections and maintaining the integrity of our political process. Our campaign finance laws remain a controversial subject and have become an issue hotly debated in this election. Our current system of separation, limits, and disclosure may not be enough. There are repeated allegations of undue influence by large donors and corporations, leading to calls for reforms. Like in every healthy democracy, the issue will continue to be debated and the voters will have the final say.
Hello. I've been asked to speak about the importance of women in governance, women at every level of government. Just a year ago, when Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked why half of his cabinet consisted of women, his response was rather profound. He simply said, "It's 2015." He knew that countries with more female lawmakers were making the greatest strides in education, paid family leave, and workforce participation. He may have also realized that companies with more gender-balanced leadership at the top are known to outperform companies with only men on top. Think about it. Half the world's population are females. Half the world's voters are women. Half the world's customers and half the world's talent are women and girls. In the United States today, only 20% of the members of Congress are women, and we have much to do to catch up. Finland's ministry is over 60% female, and their educational system is seen as the world's gold standard. In Rwanda, Parliament is well over half female, and today women can finally own land, and their country has the lowest maternal mortality rate in sub-Saharan Africa. In Sweden, their ministry and parliament are also nearly half female, and Sweden boasts some of the best public service benefits in the world. According to a 2014 Pew Research study in the United States, most people see women as more honest and ethical, excelling at compromise, and more focused on improving our quality of life than men. The same study noted that many Americans also believe there is a double standard which holds women to higher standards when seeking political office despite strong leadership skills. So why should we care about this imbalance of women in governance? As the First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, said, "Success isn't about how much money you make. It's about the difference you make in people's lives." A lack of representation of and for women limits their participation in decision-making and in making a difference in people's lives. A 2011 United Nations General Assembly resolution on women's political participation stated that women in every part of the world continue to be largely marginalized by the political sphere, often as a result of discriminatory laws, practices, attitudes, gender stereotypes, low education, lack of access to health, and a disproportionate number of women in poverty in the world. As a result, childcare, equal pay, parental leave, and sexual and reproduction rights are not getting the attention they need. These are not just women's issues. These are family issues. In 2015, the 193 countries of the UN General Assembly adopted 17 global goals to transform the world. I'm pleased that Goal 5 addresses gender equality to fuel sustainable economies and benefit societies and humanity at large. As Madeleine Albright, a former Secretary of State, once remarked, "Every country deserves to have the best possible leader, and that means that women have to be given a chance to compete. If they're never allowed to compete in the electoral process in their countries are being robbed of a great deal of talent."
My name is Yvette Terrell. I work for the U.S. Embassy as the Community Liaison Officer. It gives me great pleasure just to talk with you for a few minutes about the upcoming 2016 elections. I know many of you are probably watching the returns right now. It just brings me back to 2008 when I sat with my mother and we watched the returns with when President Obama was about to have his inauguration. And it was very historic for me as a young Black African American. It was also historic for my mother, who had never witnessed an African American president being elected in our very own country. And so there were tears, there was mixed emotions, and it was just President Obama broke the ceiling for so many minorities and people of color around the world that he was able to obtain something that people thought was impossible. And so no matter who you've voted for, and I hope that you did take the time to go out and vote, but for me personally, voting is just a real privilege to be able to do something that many of my ancestors and people in the past who have been denied that opportunity. And so for my parents, for my grandparents, and for their parents, I want to exercise a right and a privilege that has been given to us. One of the other things that I just wanted to say is I'm very grateful to be an American. Having lived in many different countries, I've seen the lack of freedom of expression, and I'm very proud to be in a country that allows us the freedom of speech and the right to vote and the democracy, the democratic process that we enjoy. Sometimes we take our liberties and freedoms for granted. So I just want to encourage all of you to just take pause and honor those who have come before you, who have struggled, who have died, who have sacrificed for the freedoms that you enjoy. And it extends well beyond the right to vote, but it extends to so many other areas too. So thank you for this opportunity to speak to you.
Hi, I'm Brad Kohli. I'm the Economic Officer here at U.S. Embassy, Port Moresby. I'm also a millennial voter. What's a millennial voter, you ask? Well, we are the largest demographic group of voters in America. We recently passed baby boomers born after World War II as the largest generation in America. There are 74.5 million of us. We were born between 1981 and 1996. We are the most diverse generation in American history. We have more immigrants than any other. Almost half of all millennials are non-white. Millennials were a key part of Senator Bernie Sanders' campaign in the Democratic primary. As college students or recent graduates, we were particularly concerned about the expense of college and the resulting student debt. The Sanders campaign, driven by millennials, forced the eventual Democratic nominee, Secretary Hillary Clinton, to develop her own plan to reduce the expense of college educations in America. Now, some of us millennials are a little older, and we have been starting families. Our concerns about education for our children and the rising cost of childcare have been priorities for both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. They have both released plans to help families afford childcare. For the last few months, candidates have worked very hard to get the support of millennials and to motivate us to vote. The election results will likely hinge on the number of millennials who took the time to cast a ballot.
I'm Devon Dine. I am the General Services Officer here at Embassy Port Moresby. Prior to working at the Embassy, I was working as a historian, so I'm here to talk about some of the historical perspective on the election. I think history teaches us that more important than how elections are won is how they are lost. So let's think about the first point. Those of you who aced your history classes will know that the U.S. was never intended to have a president in the first place, right? The first system of governing of this country was the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles, there was no president. There was a one-house Congress, but no form of executive leadership. And really, when you think about it, that makes sense. You had a group of colonists who felt that they had just overthrown the shackles of a very sort of despotic king of England. So they did not want to recreate in their brand new nation a type of government where political power could pool dangerously in the hands of one person. They created the office of the presidency because they've learned that the Articles didn't have enough centralized power. So when the Constitutional Convention met 10 years later, 1787, in Philadelphia, one thing that they created was the strong executive that they'd sought to avoid only 10 years earlier. They were still wary of having a strong central power, but what made it work this time was that they had that system of checks and balances. You had a legislative branch, a judicial branch, hopefully tethering that executive, grounding that person so they wouldn't make these sort of overarching, overly powerful decisions that they felt English monarchs had in the past. Thus, the presidency was born, and from that day forward, Americans have been having presidential elections. I would argue, though, that just as important as who wins those elections is who loses them and how. If you look back, one of the most important elections in this country was actually the election of 1800, also known as the Revolution of 1800, and it was truly revolutionary in the sense that for the first time you had a complete transfer of political parties ruling. The previous three elections, presidents with the same sort of political ideology had won the elections and governed the nation. In 1800, however, that changed drastically. You had Jefferson running against Adams. Jefferson won 73 electoral votes to Adams' 65, and overnight you had the transfer of an entire political system. Federalists voted out of office, Democratic Republicans in. And what's so revolutionary about that is it set this vital precedent for the peaceful transfer of power from a defeated party to the successor. You did that without guns, without rebellion. You did that through the vote. And that remains one of the cornerstones of our American political system today. So again, as you're watching the elections, think about those things. The fact that the U.S. having a president was never really in the plans at first, and that we have a president because of something of a miscalculation that was then addressed in the Constitution. And third, remember that just as important as who wins these elections is who and how they're lost. Thank you.